Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give folks a minute or two to filter in. So if you need to go grab some water, grab a snack, feel free to do that. And we'll get started in about 60 to 90 seconds. All right. It looks like we have a great group here, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We're so excited for how many folks are on the line with us today. I think it's going to be a really great presentation discussion. So we'll go ahead and start off by doing a quick round of introductions. So I'll go ahead and go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our Senior Content Manager here at CourseDog. So really helping research all things related to assessment, scheduling, curriculum, all of those good things that fall under academic operations. But I'll go ahead and kick it off to our guest, Denise, today.
Hi everyone, how are you doing? My name is Denise Shaver. I am the Director of Academic Assessment at Pratt Institute, and I'm so happy to be here with everyone to have this conversation about assessment and the new processes we are starting here at Pratt Institute.
Thanks, Denise. And lastly, my name is Corey Zhao. I am an associate product manager here at CourseDog. And over the past year and a half, I've been working on building our assessment platform. And I've been working very, very closely with Denise over the past few months to bringing that to Pratt. And we're all very, very excited to be talking to you all today.
Great. Thanks, Corey. Well, super excited for today's discussion. We'll be sharing the speaking responsibilities across the three of us. And then, of course, Denise is going to be sharing her experience specifically at Pratt about assessment. So really looking forward to that. So let's go ahead and dive into just a quick agenda before we get too far into things. So you'll see that we have a couple of different sections here that we want to talk through today. First, we'll go ahead by walking through, some of the challenges that we typically see institutions face when it comes to managing the assessment cycle. So we'll look at a couple of different things from, how administrators are collecting those assessment plans to what some of those challenges are that staff face when it comes to filling out those assessment reports. And after that, then going to move into talking a little more specifically about how Pratt is addressing some of these challenges and what their process looks like for moving to that more centralized method of assessment management. So Denise will go ahead and talk us through what their new process looks like, how they're working with academic units across campus, and then some advice that she has for other folks who are considering making similar changes. And a few other things I'll note before we get started. We are going to do a couple of polls throughout today's session. We always love to hear from all of you, hear what you're up to with your institution. So we're looking forward to that. And then we will leave time at the end for Q&A. But that being said, if you have any questions that come up during the session, feel free to drop those in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. And then one last thing that I always like to note, I know one of the questions we frequently get is, will I be receiving a link to the recording, the deck? The answer is yes, you will receive a follow-up email with all that information. So no worries there, you'll have that in your inbox. Okay, well, now with all of those logistics out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the actual, meat of this presentation. So as I just mentioned, we want to start off by just quickly walking through some of the pain points that we most commonly see institutions experience when it comes to managing the assessment cycle. So I know that at many institutions, it's pretty common for, each academic unit is really creating their own assessment plan and then going ahead and submitting that to a central office who, oversees the entire process. And I know that this might sound simple in theory, but I'm sure as many of you on the line know, the decentralized nature of this work definitely does come with its challenges. So first off, we see that departments, often use different approaches when it comes to creating, storing, and sharing those assessment plans. And this can come with a couple of different challenges. So first, those departments, might be using different approaches when it comes to actually creating the assessment plan. So this might mean multiple ways of formatting or organizing information, and also a higher likelihood, I think, that they might be using different types of fields. So this means there could be inconsistent or perhaps missing information when that assessment plan ultimately gets submitted. The second point that I want to quickly point out here is just thinking about how those assessment plans are stored. I know it can be a nightmare when you're trying to track different PDFs, online folders, emails, the list can really go on. And this makes it challenging for folks in those central assessment offices to, keep track of and access all of those assessment plans. And the disparate nature of this process, I think presents a couple other challenges as well. So, when thinking about those plans being scattered across different locations, it's really hard for folks to access them. So, I think that oftentimes there's little transparency, and it's difficult to really share those plans with others. And the final point I want to get to here before I pass it off to Denise is, referencing those previous assessment reports. I know it can be really helpful when you're building your current year's plan to go ahead and look back at previous years, think about, what type of progress do we need to be measuring, what type of recommendations did we make last year, all of that good stuff. So I think clearly, as the slide lays out, there's a number of challenges that really comes for those folks in those central offices who are trying to coordinate everything. And Denise, I know that you've managed this process at a number of institutions. You've seen it done a number of different ways. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about how you've seen these challenges, manifest on campus.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Bridget. It's a great question, and it's a great challenge that most assessment people face. The lack of standardization. A lot of schools have different formatting or different ways, different questions that they're asking. And that's great for the individual academic program or department, but sometimes across campus, there might more information or different information might be needed. And so standardizing that with a template or with some particular guide that lets them know that these are the components that we're looking at is essentially what's going to cause that standardization to be a lot more streamlined because it's in a platform. So one of the other challenges is that everybody has plans in different places, right? If you're collecting data, it can be in SurveyMonkey, it could be in Google Drive, it could be everywhere. And so what happens is that you'll actually, as the assessment personnel, have shared drives with, I don't know how many different folders, right? And even within that department, they have layers and layers of folders over years and different types of plans for different purposes. And that becomes unwieldy. Maybe not for that particular person, but think about the transfer of knowledge when one person leaves and then, well, they didn't give me sharing access and who owns that? And so that becomes challenging too. When we talk about accountability, I think that's one of the ones that we don't talk about as much. Accountability and tracking. For example, it's difficult if administrator, if the provost comes to you and say, well, where are we with collecting assessment data? it's essential for you to be able to say on a dime, well, we have about 30% or we have 40%, or even for your own knowledge to be able to know how many people have submitted plans. And if you don't have a good tracking mechanism, that is probably one of the most daunting challenges, is to figure out who has given it or who has not given, and who to know how to pursue, right? And so you want you want processes that actually help make that more manageable for you, as you have to follow up with so many different entities. And then one of the most essential and one of the weaker areas, and we hear it all the time in assessment, is closing that loop, right? And so when we are looking at data over time, how do we actually tell that story in an easy way of these are the changes that we've made over the years, so that when we have to write those 5-year reports or that full 10-year or 8-year summary of assessment, we're always like, give me that last report. Can you send me the report that we sent to this this professional organization? Well, if you have a place where that all lives and exists, as an administrator, as the assessment person, as a chair, or as a dean, that goes away. You know where they all are. They're in one place. And then you can give different levels of access to different people, right? When you have a platform, everybody can't or shouldn't see everything. But if everybody or the right people need to see it, it's all there. And it really helps the process go by quicker and smoother.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. And I think what you just spoke to really highlights, I think, how assessment offices, assessment staff want to kind of move towards this new model. But that being said, hang on, let's go back here. There we go. I know that for folks in the academic departments who are actually filling out the assessment reports, it can be challenging and time consuming for them as well. And I think that one of the big things is we know that this assessment information, this assessment data, oftentimes lives across multiple different systems. And, it may or may not be hard to actually be able to access this data. So at a minimum, we know that staff oftentimes, have to go hunt down this information and then have to manually transfer it, or perhaps go ahead and type that into the assessment report. And I know that this, of course, really takes a toll on staff in terms of, the amount of time that they're spending, the amount of things they're being asked to do. And I think it's really one of the reasons that it kind of contributes to this negative view that many folks have of assessment just because of that burden. And then I think similarly to what Denise was just talking about, being able to reference those previous reports, folks in those academic units who are building the reports, they might need to be able to see those previous reports as well. From looking at perhaps changes they've made to the curriculum, learning outcomes, other types of programmatic changes. So being able to see that year over year tracking really is essential, but it becomes very complex when you're trying to navigate between so many different locations. So we're going to talk a little bit in this webinar about how we address some of these challenges, and that's what we're going to get into in the next section here. But first, I want to go ahead and kick off our first poll question here to learn a little bit more about, what you're experiencing at your institution. We did limit this to a single choice, hoping to kind of hear your top challenge here, but I know it's always difficult just to choose one. All right, great. We are seeing a ton of responses coming in here, which we love to see. And all right, it looks like we are sharing the poll results out here. So pretty interesting. I would say it's fairly even across the results here, but that being said, analyzing data and acting on it comes to the top here. And I think this really speaks to what Denise was just talking about in terms of, closing the loop and how essential that is, but how difficult it can also be here. So I don't know, Corey, Denise, any thoughts here that you want to share before we move on?
I can add some thoughts. And so I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the top point being the analyzing data, but kind of the second choice also sticks out to me as the burden of assessment creating a lack of buy-in. I think from talking to dozens of schools about their assessment processes with assessment leaders, I think that's also one of the key challenges I hear, especially from leadership. Kind of the challenge that I hear is that, assessment leaders, they're the ones that are knowledgeable about about assessment best practices, why it's important. But a lot of times the sense of assessment culture, it doesn't necessarily permeate down to faculty and program chairs because that's not what they're trained in. And so, this is a very, very common challenge that I hear all the time. And it's kind of, yeah, it's interesting that it's challenges for um, 32% of 32% of you guys as well.
Corey, that was a great comment. And the reality is, and it's hard to envision, but it really is true that having a standardized process does help to alleviate some of that burden just because you have, exactly what you are being asked to do. And what I need to communicate is that a lot of those assessment plans, in general, assessment plans are for several years, 2 to 3 years. Just being able to import that previous plan over and making adjustments in it, as opposed to copying and pasting it and passing it over, or forgetting, as I've seen for people when they're going from one year to the other in an Excel sheet or in a Word document to actually, or even a Google, to actually forget to change the year. So, because they're submitting the same report, but they don't remember to change the year or sometimes somebody's name. So having it in a platform and that's standardized helps alleviate, because all of those things are automatically updated, and some of those things are automatically carry over, and it becomes easier to do over time. It's a new process. Nothing's always easy at first, but over time, it really does become quite less of a burden.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'll be taking over now. So as Bridget had just mentioned, we're kind of going to be spending the next session, the next section talking about how Denise and Pratt have been streamlining their assessment practices. I actually think this is a nice segue because I'm seeing one attendee in the question and answer section saying that their biggest challenge is creating an assessment system, saying that you guys have never had one. And so I think this next section will be particularly relevant because Denise and Pratt, prior to the past year or two, also didn't really have an assessment process. And so she'll be talking about kind of how they started to implement changes to implement that assessment system with CourseDog, but then also changing some of their internal processes as well. So we'll be taking a look at what some of their new processes look like, how they're leveraging dashboards, how they're involving programs and departments. And of course, Denise will be sharing her experience and kind of some lessons that she's learned along the way as well. Okay. We'll start with kind of looking at why there's some more urgency now around assessment. So we just talked about some of the challenges around managing assessment, a little bit about assessment culture, but of course these challenges aren't super new. Manual and fragmented processes have plagued many functions across higher ed for years. However, we're seeing new pressures that are causing administrators to rethink what new tools and processes can help them get to the root of these problems. I'm sure unsurprising to any of you guys on the line, but assessment is becoming more and more difficult. Both internal and external parties are asking for more information. Standards are always changing, both from regional accreditors to programmatic accreditors as well. And there's also increasingly more calls to prove the value and outcomes of education being delivered at these institutions. And of course, I think kind of going back to some of those challenges, there's always the question of data. With seemingly more data, there are more asks to incorporate data from different sources, to disaggregate data to see how you're serving different students across different segments. Just a lot of kind of overarching themes about different kinds of data. And so, Denise, would love to kind of hear your thoughts about your perspective on kind of what new pressures that you're seeing driving institutions to reevaluate how they're running their assessment cycles.
Thanks, Corey. Really, that last data accessibility is probably the biggest driving force because the call for equity in education has been, growing over the last, might be 10 years. The need to be able to disaggregate data based on student population groups so that you can show how you're meeting the needs and how you're inserting interventions to meet those needs and that you're providing equitable education for all the groups is really very important for assessment, but it's not always easy for assessment. So disaggregating data, you have to have those student identifiers where you can see what student it is, the demographics, first gen, how are you providing additional support, at-risk students, all of these different groups, right? Students that have a second language. How do you provide evidence that they're performing at a certain level, and that if they were not performing at a certain level, you were aware and you made certain accommodations or moves for them to make sure that everybody is brought up to at least the minimum standard of your expectations, if not exceeding it. And once you say that term, disaggregation of data, I just see faculty, the hair on the back of their neck start to, rise because sometimes that's not as familiar. Everybody's usually very, very comfortable with grades in higher ed. But when you say disaggregation of data, you're not talking about grades, right? You're talking about how they perform on standardized measures like standardized exams and rubrics, and how to show the different groups are meeting different criteria, different levels. And that becomes a little bit more complex and a little bit more challenging. And so having the tools that can help you do that quicker and faster, so you're not spending time, downloading CSV files and from Excel and having to do, any type of statistical analysis. I mean, there are people that can do that, but most people can't do that, or they can't do it quickly. And so having some type of platform that can help to do that for you at a dime really is beneficial.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Denise. Okay, great. So before we get into Pratt's specific processes, I wanted to go over the 4 hallmarks that we see moving the assessment cycle to a more streamlined and efficient process. Firstly, standardizing forms for consistency. So kind of like Denise mentioned previously, standardized forms combat irregularity in the assessment cycle and ensure that assessment plans always provide the needed information. These standardized forms often include clear guidelines embedded within them to help faculty and program chairs, assessment coordinators, help them understand exactly what information is expected and reduce ambiguity. This is particularly critical when specific information is needed for your internal reports or for accreditations, external reports, etc. Okay. The next hallmark is transitioning from dispersed data storage to a single centralized platform that helps address collection challenges. So this is one of the challenges, the main challenge that I think everybody in the audience kind of highlighted, but collecting all assessment plans in one central location allows administrators to have a complete picture of where each program and each unit stands on assessment. Additionally, administrators can easily reference previous year's assessment plans so they don't need to go digging through inboxes, online folders, online drives, and more. We also talked about reducing the burden on faculty who are filling out assessment reports. And so connecting your assessment platform with critical data systems, such as your student information system, your learning management system, as well as maybe even curriculum management tools, helps to solve some of these challenges. Integration with these critical systems saves faculty and administrators from having to track down information and manually entering it into these assessment plans as well. And so again, kind of keeping along that same theme of data collection. So, and I'll just take, for example, connecting to your SIS or curriculum platform allows faculty to pull in pertinent curriculum information such as curriculum maps, course descriptions, learning outcomes, potentially assignments directly into your assessment plan. Similarly, connecting to your LMS also enables faculty to automatically pull in assignment data, rubric data, and student outcome results as well. And collecting and storing assessment plans in one central location yields additional benefits for those managing the assessment cycle. So typically assessment leaders like most of you guys, like Denise. So centralizing assessment plans fosters transparency by providing a clear view of submission statuses for all parties. So that encourages timely completion of assessment plans, and it also improves some accountability as well. Similarly, transparent reporting and dashboards that highlight outstanding submissions and progress also enables administrators to quickly identify and address areas where units may be lagging. With an assessment tool connected to your curriculum management system, you're also able to track and directly act on action items, including ones that prompt curriculum reviews or changes. Okay. The last thing that I want to highlight is increased transparency and accountability. Kind of like we touched on before, this greater visibility also allows units to have developed this allows units that have developed strong assessment plans to share insights and best practices with others, promoting overall institutional improvement. From a lot of public websites that I've seen, there are a lot of institutions that like to share these good examples of reports either internally with their programs or externally to use as reference for other schools. This is something that I see a lot and I think is very, very beneficial. So kind of taking this internal tool as an example, is there one unit in particular that created a particularly strong assessment plan? It can be helpful to share that assessment plan with other units at your university so that they can learn beneficial practices and kind of see what an assessment plan done correctly at your institution looks like. And again, it kind of goes back into that theme of like that assessment culture where it's typically assessment leaders that understand the best practices and know the reasons for doing, and it's kind of hard to instill that into faculty. And so providing examples of this, providing transparency will allow all parties to share best practices. Okay, so next let's kind of discuss the assessment in practice at Pratt. Kind of what Denise has been looking forward to for the whole first half of this. So what does all of this look like? So this slide provides a high level overview of how Pratt now plans to run their assessment process. So I won't go through every single point in this slide since I want to give Denise a chance to speak about their process. But one thing I would like to call out is that you'll see that each step of Pratt's assessment cycle now is all managed in one platform within CourseDog. And so Denise, I'll kind of pass it over to you now. So maybe could you walk us through some of the big changes that you're making and how this is a departure from your old process?
Yes, thank you, Corey. So Pratt has had a very strong culture of assessment, but one of the challenges is, as it is in many schools, it's very siloed within the academic department. And so the call for more standardization, because we needed an institutional process that was not just departmental specific requirements. But that showed that everybody had the essential same components. Of course, they could have more based on their departmental or programmatic needs. So we called for a multi-year assessment plan. So everybody has to submit a plan that's either 3 or 6 years long. The 3 years is a 3 years of continuous outcomes, looking at the same set and then alternating for another. So they could submit the 3 years, the first one, and then submit another plan, or they could do a 6-year plan where they show what they're going to be doing for the 6 years. And then they submit that plan through CourseDog. And what CourseDog does is when those plans are submitted, so they only have to do for that time frame. So if you submit a 6-year plan, you don't have to continue to submit a plan. But from a high view of those who are looking and monitoring, the dashboard tells us how many plans have been submitted and who has submitted them or not, so that we can follow up. If they need help or if they need training, we can continue on with that. And annually, though, they will report on the plan for that year. So even though they're not submitting a plan every year, they are submitting a report for that portion of the plan, right? And so having a portal to submit those reports, those annual reports, is also good, because it helps not only the institution that needs this institutional data as a repository, right? But it also helps the departments as they're looking and they're like, oh, last year we said this in one place. And so what I've actually encouraged them to do is not only submit the plan and the report, but all of the supporting documentations for any changes or whatever they're doing, so that when they start to write their report for their deans and for their professional accreditors, they don't have to think about, didn't we pass something? Didn't we have a meeting and discuss something? All relevant documentations, and I mean minutes, curriculum map changes, everything, new catalogs, just submit them all as evidence every year so that it's there. You don't have to remember what you used or why you made this change. And well, you remember we were talking in that meeting? Yeah, oh yeah, I remember that. We don't want that. We don't want just the anecdotal memory or institutional memory. We want the evidence all in one spot. So we remember in 24, 25, these are the things that we did to make this change or to create these new program outcomes, this new curriculum. Once the reports are submitted, the tracking also, again, is easy. And now we can see those aggregated and disaggregated results in one shot, because all the evidence has been there. So one of the key components for having an assessment platform, I think, is the integration with an LMS. So if you're looking for a platform for assessment, it should have a integration with your learning management system, because once it has that, it's easier to share data through that. LMSs have, they have visualization, but assessment platforms have more analytics and visualization of that data. And that's tells a good picture, and it's easier to access a lot of the time. So those are some of the things that are essential. And again, having those reports so that people aren't looking at emails, they aren't looking in Google Drives, they aren't looking in 62 folders and having to contact it. You didn't share it with me. You know how you get it up. Somebody sends you the link and it says, oh, it's not shared with you. So there are a lot of things we want to just make easier, and a platform like this that everybody has access to. So when we were discussing just even access, the question came up, who do we give access to? And the answer was everybody. Again, this is a transparent process. Why should we limit it? Now, I mean, there are some levels of privacy that need to be maintained, but in general, we want it open so people, as Corey said, can learn from each other, right? They can look at somebody's plan and say, oh, that's cool, we should do that. And take away, there's no shame, as I constantly reinforce. This is not a pass fail. This is not a class. This is not something you're gonna not pass. This is just a learning process, right? And so those are some of the benefits of having, and this is some of the processes that we're going through and learning as we grow in this.
Thank you, Denise. One thing that you mentioned that I think was really stood out to me again, it's kind of the theme of standardization that you had mentioned previously. And I wanted to address this because there was a question in the comments in the Q&A about this, about the idea of standardization versus customization, particularly because some programs that might have programmatic accreditors might have different requirements, additional requirements. And Denise, I know that that's actually a challenge that you're facing at Pratt as well, because I just met with you and your team last week. But yeah, I think kind of you mentioned how you can address this. We can find a balance between standardization, customization. So within our assessment platform, there's you're able to create these standard templates to include, okay, what fields, what information does our institution want to capture, but then we also have the ability to add any additional information as well that might be specific to specific programs. Okay. Um, Great. And so, Denise, thank you for sharing. That was all super, super insightful. And so, kind of shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that Denise had mentioned is being able to track on the progress of different assessment reports. And so, I know that each institution has a different way of doing this now, and I'd love to hear about the different approaches from everybody on the line today. So, let's go ahead and launch this poll. We'll leave it open for about 60 seconds. Again, I think these are single selects. We kind of want to get a sense of overall, like, what is a majority of people using. So we'll leave it open for, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, give or take. Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, wow, we're seeing, and exactly 100 people responded. So we're seeing kind of a pretty even split amongst all of these different options. And I think that kind of goes just to show, there's just a really big variety of how institutions are doing this right now. And I think if we had more time, I'd love to kind of dig into each one of these and discuss the pros and cons of each individual process for this. But very, very interesting to see kind of like an even split. Okay. Perfect. And so kind of what this kind of looks like in course dogs. So as we just saw, like, there's a wide variety of how institutions are using dashboards or other spreadsheets, or even just regular email communication to track assessment plans. And so on this slide, you'll see how we at course dog kind of like to think about tracking these. So as assessment leaders, it's important to ensure that all programs and units are staying up to date with their plans and action items. Are units and programs gathering their data and compiling the reports in a timely manner? And here, the centralization of all this tracking makes this much easier. And so the dashboard on the right shows how close each academic unit is to completing their assessment plan during that given cycle. So administrators like Denise can see all of this on one screen and then use this information to follow up with individual units. Rather than sending out a generic mass email reminder given your deadlines, administrators can use this information to then send targeted reminders to individual programs.
Thanks, Corey. That's yeah, I think a really great overview there. And something that, I think we haven't talked a little bit about yet is exactly how we're involving departments and faculty in this move to a more, centralized assessment process. And I really love the approach that Pratt has taken here, where they're, allowing academic units, if they would like, they can go ahead and choose an assessment facilitator who, owns some of the responsibilities that are outlined on this slide here. So, Denise, I would love if you could kind of walk us through, what are some of the key responsibilities for these assessment coordinators, and, how do you kind of expect their participation to really help, better the entire assessment process?
Yeah. So in 2022, Pratt started, the faculty started talking about assessment, and they wanted to come up with their own kind of process and not necessarily just something somebody told them that they had to do. And so they came up with this policy with this assessment facilitator role. And this role indicates that you can choose, a chair can choose someone and have them be the dedicated assessment facilitator. And so some of the roles and responsibilities of that role of that person is to attend assessment meetings and communicate with the colleagues. So they, at Pratt, we have assessment facilitator. We have just three per semester, where I discuss with them some of the whatever initiatives the university has regarding assessment. Right now, we're in the process of rolling out CourseDog and learning how to use CourseDog. So the assessment facilitator will communicate, okay, we're using CourseDog. This is how we're going to use it. They're also primarily responsible for uploading anything into CourseDog. They also go to and attend all of their own departmental or program specific assessment meetings, whether it's an assessment committee or curriculum committee. Their job is to be a part of that, right? To share information back and forth between the institution and different departments and programs. And they share those expectations with everybody. Sometimes people go, I don't know what's going on, especially adjunct faculty or new faculty. They just like, I don't know anything about this. So that assessment facilitator role kind of keeps that conversation going. And then one of the last things they do is they actually, aside from collecting and uploading that into CourseDog, they also help to disseminate that information. We all know that assessment's constantly taking place, but oftentimes very few people know about the results. Very few people hear the report, or they hear it once at a faculty meeting and that's it. So the assessment facilitators, we're working together to come up with, creative ways of disseminating that information and making it relevant, even on the student level. All the stakeholders know what we've done, what we've collected, and what decisions we made as a result of this assessment data. If you don't do that, then assessment then seems irrelevant to many people. And that's what we want to move away from, assessment being a checkbox exercise to something that's really relevant and making real changes.
Yes, thank you for that, Denise. I think that's it's such a great model, and something I really like. So I'm very glad we got to talk about that today. Something I know that we haven't talked a ton about today, and I know that's because it's kind of a whole other topic unto itself. But I think that being said, we all know that assessment and accreditation are very closely linked, and I think that there are a couple of ways that this move towards, a more centralized approach can really, benefit you when you come to, writing those very lengthy accreditation reports. And so first, storing data, I think this is something we've already talked about a bit, so no need to talk about it too much, but I know that you have to hunt down, vast amounts of information when you're filling out those accreditation reports. So being able to, quickly access that assessment information from those reports to curriculum maps to documentations about changes you've made, being able to find all of that in one place can really ease that burden. And then, of course, there's the question of sharing data, not just internally to kind of show those best practices to each other, but also in some cases, accreditors might be asking, can I log into your portal? Can I see the work you've been doing, the progress you've been making? So again, making sure that you have all of that in one place. And so Denise, would love to hear from you a little bit about, how you envision in the future as you're filling out these accreditation reports, how your new approach is going to assist you there.
Yeah, thank you. So I've worked at some places where the accreditor actually asks for your portal. They want you to give them access to that. Middle States has not done that this far, but if they did, or even if they didn't, just to be able to say, hey, rather than having to print off hundreds and hundreds of pages in a binder for you to read, or transferring it into a flash drive, why don't we give you limited access? or complete access for a limited time to our assessment portal. And then you can review all the data in one place in a digital format rather than flipping through pages or putting it in a flash drive and having it transfer whole reports. So that's one real benefit of it. The other benefit is for the individual that is responsible for collecting, amassing all that data and making it usable and putting it in a report. When the main thing that assessment needs is the evidence, right? A good story is one part, but if you don't have the evidence to validate that story, that's what it is. It's just a good story. And so having all of the evidence to prove every point or the germane points at your fingertips without having to track down anybody and ask, did you all take minutes? So what I'm suggesting is all the minutes related to assessment, just upload them, right? Just upload everything that is related so it's there. And when that person says, oh, didn't we do this or didn't we do that? Oh yeah, let's check horse dog, it should be there, right? And so that becomes the one-stop shopping for assessment, and that's really the goal.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Denise. Well, we are almost at Q&A, but before we get there, I want to give Denise a chance to kind of share lessons learned from her experience. I think, of course, when you implement any new tool or process, it's not without its bumps in the roads. So, we have a couple of different points here highlighted on the slides that I think are all really great. But Denise, I just want to turn it over to you now. Can you talk a little bit about the lessons you've learned? What advice you would give to others who are, perhaps thinking about revamping their assessment process?
Oh, yes, thank you. That when I started, well, and this is my year I started at Pratt the same time last year. And when I started, they handed me this policy. And that policy emerged from the faculty. It's completely faculty driven. The faculty were looking for a way to create an assessment policy that was specific and contextualized to them. And so when I started, and I started saying, hey, we're going to do this, sometimes there was some question, and I would just always refer to the fact that this is your policy. This is Pratt's assessment policy. This is not mine. This is not Middle States. This is not the provost. This is the policy that faculty sat together with the Senate and they developed, and now we're implementing it. So that's one really, really strong point. If you don't have a process, it's a lot stronger if that process is faculty driven or at least faculty involved, right? Top-down mandates come up against a lot of resistance and a lot of resentment, and you want to avoid that. But if the faculty were involved with creating the process, then that takes away a lot of the reservations or the resentment towards it, because they feel like, okay, yeah, we said we wanted to do it and now we're doing it. Finding a robust platform is really important for creating, reducing the workload. As I said, it becomes automatic. And once you create that process, it becomes easier because everybody knows what to expect. And they did it last year. They'll start remembering it and it'll become easier. And again, transferring data, once you set that process up, also becomes easier. And you want to make that process as seamless as possible and reduce the amount of steps and the amount of things you have to do. That's one of the things we're working with CourseDoc. Like, let's know we less clicks and less moving around. So that's important. And once you can communicate the benefits of this platform and this process to them individually, and how it will help them understand, because even though we're talking about this, all these processes about learning and improving student learning and knowing how to get the information to determine whether the students are learning and what to do if they're not learning at the levels that you've expected, or how to make changes that will strengthen the program as a whole. And so all of these things are all kind of rooted in processes. And so creating these processes helps with that implementation and the standardization and the continuation. It helps with all of that.
Yes, thank you for that, Denise. And I know one point that you and I have talked a little bit about is, some of these things are in your control, some of them aren't. There might be folks online who say, "Well, we don't have a policy, so it's hard for me to control that." But there are other things that perhaps you should focus on more that you can control. So, Denise, anything else that you would add there that you would say, "Here's kind of my number one thing you should focus on"?
Yeah, the number one thing, if you don't have the three things that you need is for it to be faculty driven, for the administration, right, to really help push this initiative. But those first two, you don't always have any control over. But the last one that you absolutely can control is providing support. So as we're rolling out this process, I've done several things. I have virtual office hours. We have trainings. I have created an assessment LibGuide. Some schools have an assessment website, and we're posting trainings and lots of resources. You must provide a tremendous amount of support to your faculty. If you convince your faculty, and not just convince them with words, but with action, that they have support, that they're not alone, that the institution is going to help them, whether it's with resources or with people, with manpower, incentives, something to help make this process manageable. That is what is essential from an assessment professional standpoint, providing that support. If they know that they don't have to do it alone and somebody will be there to help them, it will help move the needle a lot quicker.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. Well, I know we have a little less than 10 minutes here, so I'm going to pass it off to Corey to give the briefest of overview of Course Talk, and then we will get to everyone's questions here.
Thank you, Bridget. So I know for our primary conversation today discussed assessment, but we really view assessment as kind of part of this larger cycle that we like to call academic operations. Assessment feeding into curriculum decisions, which then feed into scheduling decisions, which then based off of those results, you'll input those results into assessment and then continue the cycle. And so really CourseDog manages all parts of this cycle through one integration with both your SIS and the LMS, having your data all in one place as to facilitate that transfer of data easily between all of these different processes. And so because our platform requires only one integration between the SIS and the LMS, it's very easy to kind of just start off with what you need and then add to it over time as well.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Well, let's go ahead and get to Q&A now. We have a bunch of questions here, so we probably won't be able to get to all of them, but we will do our best here. So the first question, Denise, is for you. Someone online is hoping you could clarify the assessment facilitator role. So they're curious, is this, one person per school? And does each department have their own assessment coordinator that the facilitator works with, or what does this organization look like?
Okay, so the answer to your question is yes. It's really, we let every department and every program decide. So Pratt has a very collaborative culture. And when we created it, we didn't say how it has to be. We say this is a role. Now I created the specifications of what the facilitator has to do, but that school can say we have an assessment facilitator for the department if it's a smaller department, or for each program, depending on the need. And so everything about the role, I kind of, we crafted it. The institution assessment committee, we kind of crafted the role description, but how it's implemented in terms of the time, incentives, and everything is departmental. It's school, and they decide if it's going to be one per department or one per program.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Corey, this next question I have here is for you. This person is asking if the CourseDog system allows for separate assessment plans to be created for different types of degree programs. So say, BS, BA, master's, PhD, etc.
Yeah, great question. And so, yes, the CourseDog platform allows you to create assessment plans at the program level. And so that means like if you have a separate assessment plan for a BA in physics, an honors BA in physics, a master's in physics, and a PhD in physics, we are able to have separate assessment plans for all of them.
Okay, great. Another question we have here, Corey or Denise, feel free to answer this, but what type of student learning data is brought in from Canvas?
Yeah. Denise, I can answer this kind of generally, and then maybe you can kind of talk a little bit more specifically at Pratt. But generally, kind of the student learning data that we see most commonly associated with assessment from Canvas is data that's tied to specific assignments that live within Canvas. So whether it be a final project for a given course, we'd be looking at the students' grades in those assignments and then bringing those in. That's kind of what we most commonly see.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to be using for Canvas is rubric data, right? Because when we're looking at assessment, it's not always grades. It's generally not grades. It's the standardized data, and so we're looking to bring in rubric data so that we can look at how the students perform on various criteria. And so where most of our faculty already have or are working on rubrics or some type of standardized measure that we can aggregate and disaggregate to see and drill down where students are performing on what level in various assessments.
Okay, great. We have a follow-up question here about data from the LMS. So this person is wondering, can faculty, enter data manually, say, perhaps if that information doesn't live in the LMS, for example, maybe there's some sort of program assessment data that institution doesn't, keep in their LMS?
Yeah, that is a great question. Yeah, so I know that today we kind of highlighted the LMS integration, but we also understand that assessment data can come in a lot of forms that don't necessarily live in the LMS. And so we have the ability to kind of upload any form of a source assessment data through file uploads or PDFs, and then using that as evidence to determine whether or not measures and outcomes have been met. And so, yes, we have a little bit of flexibility there too.
Okay, great. Denise, I have another question for you. This person is wondering, at Pratt, are you assessing program learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, or institutional learning outcomes?
That's a great question. Right now, program learning outcomes, but we are in the process right now of creating and confirming our student learning outcomes, of our institutional learning outcomes, and we will not require for them to map down to the course outcomes, but the mechanism exists for them to be able to do that. Mostly we're going to be doing program and institutional level outcomes, tracking and looking at that. We have to create an alignment matrix for our accreditors, our regional accreditor. And so having a system that will help us show that connection right across the institution will be very valuable for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it looks like we are almost at the top of the hour. So I want to say that unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to every question here since we've had so many, but we'll definitely follow up with folks afterwards. So feel free to keep submitting questions if you have more. But I think we're going to go ahead and probably close out things. So we want to say thank you so much to everyone and do a final poll question here. So that way, if you do have more questions for you, we have your information so we can go ahead and reach out to you and get all of your questions answered. All right. Well, like I said, we are almost at the top of the hour. So I want to thank everyone so much who's joined us today. I particularly want to shout out Denise. Thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your experience. I know that that's so helpful to everyone here. And then I would also like to thank the folks behind the scenes, the folks from Inside Higher Ed who've been helping to facilitate today's webinar. So that is it from us, but thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.